Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be working in my sketchbook, and I thought it would be nice to do like another real-time-ish sketchbooking session because I'm not too sure. Have I done a sketchbooking session where I've done a gouache piece? So I've always had my gripes with gouache, and I sometimes love it, I sometimes hate it, but most of all, I feel like I've always just struggled with it. So I thought, because I think you guys are very much aware, I low-key have like a hyperfixation over Danheng from Honkai Star Rail, so that's all I've been low-key drawing in my sketchbook as well as like digitally as of recently. So I thought it'd be fun to see if I can kind of like channel that energy into working on a gouache piece. Now this can kind of go like one of two ways. One is that because I'm so motivated to make sure that he looks the way that I want him to, I will spend enough time to actually finish this particular gouache piece to my own standard, if that makes sense. Or this could totally backfire and I will get too frustrated because I like Danheng so much that if I don't make him look the way that how I imagine, I might quit early. So we'll see how well this will go. Our sketch. So I've already done a very brief sketch done with like the red Pilot Color ENO, and then I already went ahead and used just a normal mechanical pencil to do kind of like a cleaner line work over top so that my lines don't disappear once I add color. And it just helps me keep like structure and it kind of keeps everything kind of like in order while I'm slowly building up the layers to be like more opaque and I don't lose like some of the shapes or areas while I'm painting. So I do have the Paul Rubens watercolor set right here. So right now it's like this is my go-to because this is the one that I've been using more recently. So my plan is to work with watercolors to kind of establish our lighting situation, general color palette for the most part to give myself a base, as well as low-key priming my paper to let the gouache adhere to it because this is such a smooth surface. Sometimes watercolor gives my paper a little bit more of that rough texture. I don't know if it's because the pigments or because the fibers of the paper just loosen up a little bit and you get a little bit of pilling. It just works a little bit better in my opinion when I'm working with gouache. So let me try to figure out how I want to set this up. Okay, I actually ended up not switching the camera angle. I might do it when I work with gouache just because I do work more upright and I do cover more of the surface if I'm doing like finer details, but hopefully if I do more like general specific, we can knock out more of like the values and like the colors that I want. And once we get to working on finer details or trying to solidify things, I'll change the camera angle to be slightly more on the sideways view so that you can kind of see this side where my hand is rather than just like an up angle. Or you guys can let me know, do you guys prefer I keep it as like one stationary angle like this so you can kind of see the entire piece come together? Or if my hand does feel like it's in the way too much, just let me know and I will adjust it for next time. Alongside with the fact that I found my bag of where I used to keep all my other brushes in here. So I made this really janky bag by, I forget what it is. We got like this kind of, I forget what this plastic material is called, but I sealed the edges with a hair straightener so that they would be kind of like closed and form like this little bag size. Cause I always love these clear bags for like art supplies. And then I bought a zipper and like, I think it's like super glued it to this surface so that I could hold all of my super long brushes, which I don't really use nowadays, but there's like a lot of other brushes that I could use for watercolors. I also have some spare tubes in here. But yeah, there's like a few more brushes I can use if I want to work with gouache. So hopefully these will help out a little bit. I think this is like more familiar with what you guys are used to seeing my brushes in. So these are like more commonly used brushes. And we used this beat up old brush, and I think that's it. Thinking how I want to keep the paper down. Otherwise, in the past, I've definitely taped off the page and then binder clipped it as well so I could have like a clean border. But because I wanted to fill up more of this page or the spread, I am gonna let this one kind of like bleed over. So I don't really mind if we have like raw edges or like very frayed edges. And working with gouache, my color palette changes to be more vibrant but darker compared to like something more airier. So should we try to do that? I didn't really clean my palette. If you guys use like watercolor or gouache, do you often clean your palette? I'm definitely one of those people who don't, and sometimes it might give you more like slightly muddier colors if you're not careful. So what I'm doing is trying to get a batch of color here, and I'm adding as much water as I can so that we can kind of dilute it while I'm working on the page. Sometimes like when it comes to like 3/4 angle, I do make the shorter side, or the side that's turned more away from the viewer, is the one that I drop into shadow. 3/4 view, adding in the shadows more deep here. You can have like the little triangle for your highlight or some of that bounce light. And actually add in the proper colors for danheng so that I have a good base to start off with when doing gouache. I know some people ask or even advise me to do this step with kind of watered down gouache, and even though I know that's like how a lot of people approach doing this kind of step of doing like initial washes or priming your paper, prepping your painting, whatever, I just like using watercolor. I have an easier time mixing the desired colors that I want. I feel like I don't have to be wary of like such a thick consistency right off the bat. So it's definitely a little bit more comfortable for myself. I don't think there's like a reason or a need for you to go out to buy watercolors to do this step. Just water down your gouache. I'm sure it's probably better to do that step because it's probably providing a better surface for your paint to adhere. But like I said, this works better for me in my brain. Because right now he's going to be very, very yellow for quite a while. But I've done this more recently with like my watercolor paintings where I'm adding more of a yellowy, orangey tinge to everything to give it more of that warmer look. But also acts a little bit like an underpainting color. So as long as I'm careful and preserve some of the areas, then this yellow will kind of pop through and give that warmth to everything. Which sometimes is just harder for me to preserve when working with gouache. So we'll just try our best today, see how it goes. And his hair is black. I might lean it a little bit more brown on this side. And then shift it to more of a cooler tone as we move away from our lighting. I'm not going to be super precise when adding in these like initial washes of like color because a lot of this is going to be covered up by gouache. Also, it'll be a lot smarter if I also let the page dry a little bit more, but I'm a little bit impatient at the moment. So to like mix blacks, oftentimes with watercolor or painting, I will mix a lot of anything that's like similar to burnt sienna or burnt umber, raw umber, and then your mixture of either slightly more reds to your blue greens is what I like to mix. So you just have to find a way to neutralize your colors and let some colors be a little bit stronger here and there depending on if you want it to lean it more blue, lean it more green, lean it more yellow, whichever you like. That's what I learned back when I was doing kind of like intro into painting during my uni days, and painting has always been like my weakest, well, okay, maybe let's not say weakest because sculpture is my weakest. But painting took a lot of like actual learning to build up certain skills for either like rendering, color theory, like all that stuff. And I was definitely, I mentioned this like a gajillion times, I was definitely weaker of the bunch. I was definitely more of a kid. I guess I was a kid during that time. That was more focused on dry medium. So I was better at doing like graphite, charcoal, Conte, like vine charcoal, that kind of stuff, pastels, because this is how my brain worked. I liked working from light to dark and pull out your highlights. It was just difficult for me. Also, I've really soaked this paper, so it's gonna be a little weird. So I'm not really following a specific color palette anymore. We're just gonna let my brain go, because I always get back into this kind of color palette with like golden colors and like a turquoise or a teal. I'm kind of curious on how I'm gonna end up painting this. If I can, I would like to keep it on the lighter side. But I feel like there's like only one piece that I've done, which is not like one that I super like, but I like the color palette of it. I think it's like of Sukasa from Ensemble Stars. Still very orange. Is there a medium that you guys like really struggle with? I know like oftentimes I ask what's your favorite medium to work with, but is there a medium that just does not jive with you? Because even though I can't think in the 3D space, I don't really have like a super strong desire to do a lot of like sculpture work other than like minifigurines every so often. But I wish I was better at doing painting, and I think part of it is because of my lack of patience and letting things like remain in the ugly phase before it can start to look a little bit more cohesive, because you'll spend more time to kind of like render things out, flesh it out kind of slowly from going general to specific. But sometimes I'm in that state where I will heavily render the face because I need that instant gratification of liking the piece right away. So I'm trying to give myself enough context at this point. And that's gonna be up to whoever's working on it. So if you're working on a piece and you're following along, as long as you have enough context to what you're working on, then you can go ahead and work with your gouache or move on to the next step. Or if you're not like me, you maybe already started with gouache instead. That brown is really strong. So I can kind of see this is more of like a purpley-ish blue-green color. So we can add a little bit more of that color into here. And if it's too, as you can see, too blue now, you can knock it back with your brown, which might have a little bit more red, a little bit of yellow. So right now we're too green, so I might have to add a little bit more red. And just like slowly neutralize it to like what color you think fits the best. Because I don't mind making Danhung's hair a little bit more like a dark teal. Because I mentioned this before, I want to like gouache. There's just sometimes my patience for it. And partly it might be because I typically do these for like a video, so I don't give myself the time to actually spend working on it without being too conscious about like the camera. I'm looking trying to like fade this out similar to how I would work with watercolor, but because this paper has no sizing or anything to really allow the paper to absorb the watercolor, it doesn't really blend out the same way. Especially like when I oversaturate it like this, it becomes very like fuzzy almost. But if I be a little bit more patient, then it kind of just sits on top of the paper instead of like really soaking in. Because I'm kind of worried I've soaked into the back of the next page. I've actually forgotten to put down like a piece of cardstock to prevent it from having too much moisture go through all the rest of the pages into the back of this one. I also don't want to forget the little red detailing near his eye. You can kind of see he's looking very like rough at this point. So my water has gotten so dark from mixing up all the darker colors for his hair. Now I'm gonna let this dry as much as I can. I might get a blow dryer, or I'll get like a little fan to let this completely dry before we start working with gouache, because I don't want it to react weirdly. But this is kind of like what the base is gonna look like for now. I'm gonna do this right now. Let's see. It's like 5.5 by 7. I'll cut it this way. It's a little bigger than 7. A lot bigger than 7. That's okay. I don't know where my scrap cardstock went. Like I said, I'm gonna quickly... Ooh, see, I'm getting dangerously close, but it's definitely moisture onto some of these pages, which is not ideal. So I'm just gonna lay down the cardstock to hopefully take the brunt of it if I accidentally start saturating it a little bit more when I'm using the gouache as well. So I think this is as dry as it's gonna get. Now I wanted to see if you guys can actually hear the difference between like when I've added watercolor to the paper versus like the smoothness of the paper. So there's definitely a difference. This does have a slightly more like rough texture to it. Like I can physically feel it, how smooth this is versus this. And it's slightly buckling, which is okay. So let's go ahead and work with our gouache. So I am using the HIMI MIYA Jelly Gouache as usual. And I have the 24 colored set. Take this off. Here's our gouache. I am going to switch my water containers too. And then I'm probably just going to quickly give these a good soak with a spray bottle and or a syringe so I can kind of like prime all my paints first. So I kind of have like a flat brush. We have a round one. We have 2 other round ones that I like to use for detailing and just like smaller areas. Let's go ahead and start with painting with gouache. So I'm just gonna start with his face and hopefully I can kind of keep the lightness for the most part, because oftentimes I think this is what kind of controls my color palette. And I'm gonna start off with our kind of square flat brush to do our base. But I think I've already mentioned how much downhang is pretty much like my hyperfixation at the moment. So I'm gonna try to add as much white as I can first, and then I'll slowly start tinting it with a little bit more yellow. There's already an existing color of peach on my palette, so I'm kind of mixing that in a little bit. Okay, so let's get started. Hopefully this will be okay. It might be already still too dark, but we can always just slowly layer up the color of it. And that's why I've been more recently liking kind of like this square brush. I don't know if it's because it's a little bit softer. I find it a little bit easier to layer up colors in like thinner layers this way. I don't really remember if I've done like a real-time session though, like this, of painting with gouache, because usually I opt to put something in the background while I paint. But maybe me being a little bit more present into painting for this one might lead to a better result, so I'm not like trying to rush it per se. I'm just kind of doing like the base of it for now. Once we get into some of the other areas, I will switch to a smaller brush. So right now he's reading a little too orangey. But I feel like I don't really mind the oranginess if I use like a very specific type of like blue-greenish color. Like I mentioned, it's kind of like my favorite color palette color. I think one of the brushes that I don't own is like a dagger brush. I always feel like, or do I have one similar to a dagger brush? This is more like a round, flat. I've seen some people use that as well for like watercolor painting, gouache painting. It's very versatile, so. Also, sometimes when I draw a downhang, and I don't add in some of like the shadings for either the clothing or what is it called? Context for his outfit. He resembles a little bit more like a Renzotto from Nijisan Gen because of the dark hair, horns. At this point, I might switch to a smaller brush for his face. He's gonna look a little funky for like a little while longer. One reason is also because like his eyebrows are not present. I think also when I work with gouache like this, I don't feel like I talk very much. A lot of silence. Trying to lock in. But kind of like similar to digital, I want to be able to see if I can let some of the colors pop through, like the surrounding colors, or just like mess around with the colors that are present. Because like if you, as long as you have like your values somewhat correct, you can kind of play around with the colors without having to worry about it looking like super off. Because I think while I was working on this already, I forgot about like the conscious effort to keep everything a little bit more on the airier side, or at least like keep the luminosity much lighter on this end, which might be okay. We'll see. It's just not my intention when I first started doing the painting, if that makes sense. Like it's not really following the vision, my initial plan. I kind of wish I added a little bit of a border of black or something, because I kind of lost where his bangs are. Brighten up his smile just a smidge. Kind of using a muted green for the shadows of his eyes. I'm gonna darken up this side. I think while I'll let everything dry, I'm gonna attempt to block in parts of his hair. I'm a little bit nervous about this, so maybe we'll start off with brown. Add a smidge of blue in there. It's like a very muted brown, but it looks very close to the color I had initially when I was doing the watercoloring phase. I don't know, every time I look at Selwyn, I was like, oh, I really love his character design, all that stuff. He embodies like a lot of things that I like from characters that I like. But then I see Danheng and I'm like, why didn't I make a character like this? Kind of shorter hair. I always like Danheng's, just like his generic hair. I don't know how you want to describe it. It just looks round and fluffy. It frames his face well. But at least I knew I wanted Selwyn to have like dark blue, black adjacent hair at least. But I can tell like Danheng is one of those characters that I really want to just continuously draw a lot, especially recently. And because he's a free character, I'm just glad to have him. Splurging on any other character, then I would definitely just try to get more of his idolins. Because anything for our beloved Danheng. Like, I love him as a character just in general, but visually also just really like. Because like I mentioned, I'm hoping that me liking a character a lot will help make sure that I don't quit too early while doing the piece. And I'm gonna treat this at least a little bit with more care than I typically do. Because I don't think I really did gouache in the sketchbook too much other than the very first page. Or like the intro cover, I guess. And because of that, I want to take advantage of the energy that I have to draw this man and turn it into at least a time where hopefully I will just enjoy the process of using gouache. As we're painting kind of like our base layer. Oftentimes, like when I've been painting with gouache, especially for like hair on the darker side, I've always done almost, I would say like the second darkest value for the hair as like the entire base, and then paint over it again and again to darken and or make things lighter for quite a while, at least in a way that I was like somewhat satisfied with it. But I want to be very careful with how I'm transitioning Dan Heng's hair color here. I was trying to think what other like character fixations I have. I do want to draw Flynn's more, so like out of the Genshin characters, I think that's the one that I'm thinking about the most. For Genshin in general, I think Venti, then it was Zhongli, and then Kokomi, maybe even Kaya. Who else is there? Nuvalet, Navia, maybe. I'm trying to think who did I continuously draw in my sketchbook for like a period of time. It's been a while since it's been like a Star Rail character, I think. Or I don't even know if I had like a fixation on a Star Rail character per se. I know there's like characters that I just like really liked. I guess maybe Anaxa. I drew him quite a bit, to the point where I think you guys noticed that that I've drawn him like a lot. But then I took a bit of a step back from drawing like specifically livers. And then my other hyperfixation was obviously just my OCs. I've always drawn Masaki like a heck of a lot whenever I had anything to do in my sketchbook. He was like the easiest for me to draw. And then I introduced Kaisen, so I started drawing him a lot. Then I started drawing Selwyn, probably the most after that. I guess like my hyperfixation used to be Wonu. That's like all I would draw. I do miss drawing him, but I think it's best that I've taken kind of like a step back from like at least like the way I've consumed media in a sense. Who else was there? Jonghan I also drew like a heck of a lot, and like China Line from 17, so like June and the 8. So part of like the hair shape, I'm going to have to fix when I use the smaller brush. I don't trust myself getting like the super thinner fine lines. Oh, another one character. Ignatz from Fire Emblem 3 Houses and Ash. I used to draw them so much. Mostly like Ignatz, and he's kind of like the start of like me doing the 3 colored color palette water-based marker drawings in my sketchbook. So once we start to darken up the color, then we'll start to lean it towards more of a black. But for now, I don't mind if it's kind of like the turquoise color, because I think that's like a very prominent color in Dan Heng's outfit anyways. I'm always in awe of people who like deliberately can place certain kind of like brush strokes in a very like artistic way. I am not that type of person. I'm the type of person who likes things to look a little bit smoother. So I did mention also that I don't really clean up a palette. And one reason is because like I'm lazy, but also it just feels like a waste for some of these pigments. So like oftentimes if I have a lot of darker colors, and this is why I keep them kind of like grouped to one side. So I have like greens and a little bit of yellow. I have white completely separate. I kind of do mostly like skin tones up here, and then everything else is kind of like free range. But I try to keep all my dark colors together so that I can slowly mix them with one another. So I mentioned that this might be a better angle while I'm doing the details at least. But like I mentioned earlier, let me know if you prefer like only an overview version while I'm working on my sketchbook. And then well, at least you guys can kind of see my palette a little bit more closely. So this is definitely leaning more towards blue first. Also, I totally forgot. I was gonna make him look like he's blushing. I guess I omitted that. maybe I'll go back in, do a light layer of like hatching of like a pink color across his face. Otherwise, he just looks more confident rather than like the shy sketch that I had initially, which is not like a bad thing by any means. He's gonna be a little wonky until we can add some line art. So I'm just gonna try my best to add as many of the colors that I initially wanted in his eyes, and then once we start adding like the darker areas, that's when I'm gonna kind of really kind of like flesh out and render everything. This brush I like to use for like the smaller details. So we'll see how well it works. Otherwise, I will dig into my stash that I've found recently. So I want this consistency to be wet enough for me to glide very easily, but also not too light or like watered down. Otherwise, it'll make it hard for me to get like an opaque line. You can kind of help it. This is another reason why I often lose the airiness. It's because I'm a sucker for like high contrast line art. So I'll probably lighten up this color afterwards. We can do a little bit of highlight up into his lash line. Okay, we're gonna outline where I want the pupil to be, and then we'll add a blob of yellow around the center of that after. Their bottom lashes. Also, I can't really tell. Does Donghong have two of those like red detailings? Like I know on this eye, he has like that thicker red underline thing near like the outside corner of his eye. But I can't tell on this model if he has like a smaller version of it on this side. Because I already feel bad enough that sometimes I forget to add that red little detail to his eyes. I think it's also because I lost his eyebrows that I don't know what exactly the expression that I want to give him anymore. Bring back our base color. I've been doing this with eyes more recently. Adding a small highlight. And then I might kind of add a bit more shading. All that to areas around his eyes. Because I just like characters like this. Even like Artem from Tears of Femus. I talked about this a lot. He's like one of my favorite like just male characters. Because I like Gap Moe. I like cute characters. He still needs his eyebrows, but I probably fill those in once we actually work on the hair, because it's gonna be covered. Also, something I'm wary about, because I've done this like a handful of times and it really sucks, is that dropping your paintbrush while it's in your hand and it has wet paint right on top of your piece. It's sometimes the worst feeling. I also forgot his ponytail's here, so I will have to remember to paint that in eventually. Okay, let's start with trying to section this off, I guess, and then I'll slowly add in the darker colors into here, and then we can really make this kind of like a blue, green, black color. just want to draw him very handsome or pretty, either or. I'll take it. I've always talked about like not being able to draw people looking more like ikemen. I guess like even for like girls or women, I do struggle drawing like bishonen, or not bishonen, bishoujo? It's even like sometimes I think like I did a good job, and then I get comments being like, oh, they look so cute. And I'm like, thanks. But I understand why. I give like shorter, rounder faces, typically larger eyes, softer expressions, so they probably lean more cute rather than more mature. Because even when I draw my own OCs, like sometimes I draw them so baby, like Masaki and Kaisen, and I'm like, why? Oh, that's another thing. When I was like drawing Flynn's, I forget. Oh, maybe it was for like a photo card that I did of him recently. I am so confused by his hair. I am aware that he is like, from the front it looks like short hair, but at the back he has like a lot of hair. It's very long. But with his collar for his jacket being so wide, it's sometimes hard to keep that sense of space make sense with the hair being short-ish, so it kind of shows within inside like the curve of his collar, and then the rest to flow outside. It just doesn't make sense. Reasoning. Just do whatever. Okay, also I can't lose the shape of his hair, so let me try to fix this. Also, like, one thing about gouache is that I always struggle between being very, like, leaning towards how I like to work with mediums, which is like typically leaving things very smooth, very clean if I can, and having things look a little bit soft. But the thing about gouache is that oftentimes I lean more away from that and go towards something just clean and crisp and less soft, and it's more like bold sections of color. And oftentimes they kind of clash in my brain and on paper. So I think that's oftentimes like my problem, is that I want it to be one thing, but I do the other, or I try to do the other, and then I switch back to what I initially think I want. But the good thing about gouache, as long as like you don't super overwork it at the very beginning, there's a little bit more like room for you to cover it up, I guess, and like try again. Will I hate this? Maybe. I'll just stick to trying to fix up this area first, I guess. Can add our funky colors in later. So I don't even know what this was. I think it's like the little, I guess I have an example here, because I do have like a certain pattern for hair sometimes when I draw, so I think this is what it was. That, or maybe Donhong, I guess he does have it in his hair, maybe that's why I drew it like that. So I'm using thinner layers, which is gonna bother me a bit because it looks so streaky here, but also like for hair, as long as I'm doing it in the right direction, it kind of just looks like texture for the hair, so maybe it's not as bad. But I lived in like my neighborhood for such a long time, because like when I was in middle school, like going into high school, the kids were like toddlers, and now I think they're like teens at driving age, and I'm like, oh geez, I'm so old. So I don't want the shapes to look too repetitive, and the fact that if we get darker and darker to this side, less of the details are going to be like as easily readable. So I wouldn't mind like chunking in some of these areas instead of having them as like individual chunks, I guess, in a certain way. I think he's looking good so far. I'm glad I am taking the time to paint him. Because as much as I love sketching, and sketching is like my #1 for like both digital and traditional, something about being able to play around like with colors freely is always nice. And I know with at least like traditional art, there's like more at stake, at least with like coloring, because sometimes it's hard to go back after you place something down. And some of these like traditional art choices that I make for color, I never would do in digital because I can be a little bit more precise, or like I don't let myself experiment because I have like a very set procedure sometimes. Is that okay? Maybe I don't like it. Maybe I'll pick up like a light blue color and try to carve this back out. It's looking a little too like chunky rather than like actual looking kind of more like strands of hair. This is too much. I think something that's hard as well. It's like adding in some colors that are typically not present in like the colors that it should be. Like this is supposed to be black hair, but I'm treating it very loosely by adding more of like browns and then shifting it to black as we move away from the light. And this is my problem. I can see it already mixing with the yellow. I don't know if it's because it wasn't completely dry or because, like I said, my mixture is a little bit more wet. So the more I go over it, I'm reactivating the paint underneath. But even doing this part, sometimes it makes everything look more bulky as well. Also, my line accuracy is terrible today. I don't know. I might cut into this a little bit more. It's like our skin tone shadow color. This could definitely like make or break it though, because not everything needs like a dark outline, you know, for your drawings. Like I mentioned, that's usually my preference, is that I do like having some sort of darker contrast by adding some sort of line art. Like I said, I think the color that I mixed up is very close to the darkest color that I made for here. Because of that, we don't really need to add too much line work to these areas. It's really quite dark and more or less like crisp-ish. The thing is, like, his hair is black. But I know, like, as we approach, like, the end of his ponytail, or, like, a certain section of his ponytail, we do get into, like, turquoise territory. So maybe I should try to mix that in really quick. I know you guys can't really see because of the angle that I have my camera. I think that's good enough for his hair-ish. I might add a little bit more. It's just this area I think I just don't like. And maybe it's because of the highlights. That, or I want to widen this part, which I definitely can do. problem is, like, I need it slightly thick enough so that I can cover up that black. Because black is, like, one of the more difficult colors for me to cover up appropriately without reactivating whatever is underneath. How did I have it initially? I think I took a photo. A little too late though, unfortunately, because I always forget to take progress shots. Look, it's gonna be harder to cover up, but it's not impossible, so I think we should be okay. I'm gonna wait for that to dry. I'm gonna erase like the pink area there so it doesn't look like his eyebrow is entirely floating. So the funny thing is the glare is kind of bad on my end right now. So I didn't realize how thick I put this line. Let's quickly do this side. And then I'll work on the rest of his clothing and his hand. I might even grab the same kind of like skin tone-ish color that I was using to glaze over this section. Or highlight. But this white reads very cool to me, which is why I kind of want to see if there's like a warmer white out there that would mix better with like yellows. That, or maybe I should just mix it with like the cooler yellow that I have. Maybe I'll make it feel brighter. Okay, I think I'm gonna call Danhung done. Like I said, I think I did spend a little less time on working on every other place other than his face, but at least for me, I think that's all that matters, is that I didn't end up in a place where I accidentally just like really hate it. Not accidentally, I just ended up hating the piece completely. One sneezing fit later. The thing with Danhung, do I want to add the blush? I don't know. And then if I don't like it, we can get rid of it. It's not the worst thing ever. It's gonna be just very subtle, but this is kind of, I don't know what he's looking like. I do like how the hair turned out for the most part. I also like his face, so that's a plus. And then the rest is okay enough. So I think we're just gonna zoom out and I'll show you guys what he looks like overall. And I think that's it for today's like little gouache painting session. And this is what he looks like though. So I'm glad it turned out. That's all I can be thankful for. I did not end up painting like the rest of his body on this side and actually completing it. Partially because like the binder clips are technically in the way. I probably would tape off the edges, and then that way the binder clips can just stick to the places that are taped off, and then you kind of have like a nice crisp clean edge for you to work with. So yeah, another Danhung for my sketchbook. Specifically the Permancer Terre is like my favorite, or one person lovingly called him Danhung Peter version. But yeah, just adding him to more spreads. I probably will continue to draw him more in the future. I don't know how many I will make into like specifically videos, but I definitely will just continue to draw him. Yeah, and this one's just like very curled because of how I had my binder clips. But I think that is it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me paint Danheng today. It won't be like a full session, I'm pretty sure. I probably will edit it down somehow, but yeah, I had a lot of fun painting him. I think he actually turned out pretty handsome, which I'm just glad. But yeah, I'm just gonna end the video here because for some reason I'm congested right now. So I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye! Guess who forgot? Okay. I put everything away, so I'm gonna reopen everything again. I forgot to add the little yellow highlight into like the center of his eyes. I don't know how accurate people tend to be when they draw like fan art of certain characters, but I'm gonna do it anyways. I need to make sure it looks yellow enough though. There we go. Now we're done. Okay, bye.